It was the kind of evening that should have been forgettable. Quiet, mundane, the kind of stillness you only notice once it's broken forever. I had just poured myself a cup of chamomile tea when my husband's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, screen lighting up with a message he clearly hadn't meant for me to see. I never meant to read it. I never wanted to be that wife, the one who checks. But sometimes the truth doesn't whisper. It blazes into your life, screaming through the glow of a message that wasn't meant for your eyes. Can't wait to see you tonight, love. Got something special planned. Just us. No distractions. My heart clenched so tightly in my chest I could barely breathe, the words burning a hole through every illusion I had about the man I thought I knew. My name is Claire Whitmore. I've been married to Daniel for nearly 13 years. We live in a modest 2-story house just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, with our son Lucas, 11 years old, bright-eyed, and heartbreakingly innocent. Until that night, I thought we were a typical family. Maybe not perfect, maybe not thrilling, but rooted in something steady, something real. I stood there, frozen, watching those words echo in my mind like a siren in a tunnel. The steam from my tea curled in the air while the warmth drained from my body. One message. That's all it took to tear open the floor beneath me. I wanted to scream, throw the phone, demand an answer, but Lucas's laughter drifted in from the backyard, and suddenly I remembered. I didn't have the luxury of breaking. Not yet. Instead, I deleted the message and placed the phone exactly where I found it, my hands trembling, but my mind already racing faster than my heart could keep up. I knew Daniel. He was careful. Always so careful. If this was what slipped through, then what lay beneath must be far worse. I had a choice to make in that moment, and I made it without a word. I would not confront him tonight. No tears. No shouting. If he wanted to burn down everything we built, then he would do it with his own hands, and I would be watching, documenting, and waiting. Because if Daniel Whitmore thought he could betray me, discard me like yesterday's promise, and walk away clean, then he never truly understood the woman he married. I don't remember exactly how long I sat there in the kitchen after reading that message. Only that time seemed to warp around me, stretching into a haze of silence thick enough to drown in. The tea had long gone cold in my hand, yet I couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't think clearly beyond the heavy pressure that settled behind my ribs like a stone. I kept replaying the words in my head, each syllable another knife that twisted a little deeper. The image of Daniel whispering sweet lies to another woman while our son played mere feet away was almost too much to bear. It wasn't just the betrayal of intimacy, it was the betrayal of normal, of family, of the life I had sacrificed so much to build. 12 years of loyalty, quiet endurance, shared struggle, reduced to a secret message on a glowing screen, carelessly left in view like a discarded promise. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something colder had taken root inside me, something quieter and far more dangerous than hysteria. And yet, beneath the resolve forming in the pit of my stomach, there was a sharp, searing ache. Because even as anger began to calcify around my grief, the pain of being discarded, of being so easily replaced, tore through me like glass beneath the skin. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was the realization that I had no one to turn to. My parents had passed years ago, my brother lived halfway across the country, and the handful of friendships I had left had slowly eroded as my world had shrunk around Daniel's schedule and Lucas's needs. I had disappeared piece by piece into the roles of wife and mother, only to find myself now utterly alone, stripped of identity, abandoned emotionally by the man who once called me his home. Outside, Lucas's laughter rang out again, innocent, untainted by the rotting truth unraveling just beyond the glass door. That sound was the only thing that tethered me to the moment, anchoring me to the reality that I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. He needed stability, not another fracture in a world already full of broken promises. I had to protect him, even as everything around me began to crack. Drawing a deep breath that burned on the way down, I steadied myself and picked up Daniel's phone again, forcing my fingers to stop trembling as I erased the message thread. It felt like burying evidence, not to hide the truth, but to buy myself time to think, to plan, to gather strength. I knew Daniel would never confess willingly, and I couldn't afford to confront him without knowing the full extent of the damage. The affair was real, but how deep did the rot go? That night, I called the only person I still trusted, Ella Morrison, my oldest friend from college, now a private investigator in Raleigh with a reputation for seeing through facades and peeling back masks. We hadn't spoken in months, not since her divorce, but when she heard my voice. Tight, low, hollow. She knew something was wrong. "Claire?" she said quietly, already shifting into that calm, focused tone I remembered from our late-night heart-to-hearts. "Tell me everything." I did, and as I spoke, the storm inside me found direction. The words poured out, shaking, bitter, ashamed, yet each syllable made the picture clearer. Daniel wasn't just unfaithful, he was calculating. If I had found that message, then chances were it wasn't his first. He had grown careless, arrogant, comfortable enough to leave evidence lying in plain sight, certain I'd never look. By the time Daniel came home that evening, I had already begun building the shell I would need to survive what was coming. I greeted him with a warm smile, the kind I had trained myself to give for years, the kind that said everything was fine even when it wasn't. I kissed his cheek, asked about his day, and listened to his lies while memorizing every pause, every awkward laugh, every darting glance. He thought he was still in control. He had no idea the tides were shifting under his feet. That night, after he fell asleep beside me, his back turned as if I were little more than a fixture in his life. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, arms folded across my chest to keep from shattering. The clock ticked its steady rhythm, counting down to a reckoning only I could see coming. Every breath he took felt like an insult, like another inch he stole from the life we were supposed to share. He had made his choices in silence. I would answer in silence too. In the days that followed my quiet discovery, I moved like a woman possessed. Haunted, yes, but also resolute in a way that startled even me. There were no scenes, no shattered vases, no tearful confrontations in the dead of night. Instead, there was an eerie stillness in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks the sky. I wasn't ready to confront Daniel yet. I wasn't interested in catharsis or confession. What I wanted, what I needed, was strategy. With Ella's help, I began charting the unseen terrain of his betrayal, pulling threads from our life together until the whole web began to shimmer with quiet, damning evidence. At first, it was small things, cool logs that didn't match his supposed schedule, late-night charges at restaurants we'd never visited, mysterious gaps in his travel itineraries. But as we looked deeper, a pattern began to emerge, and that pattern told a story far more grotesque than the one I'd first imagined. I began documenting everything, each finding carefully filed and time-stamped, each receipt and screen capture tucked neatly into the digital vault Ella helped me create. We established protocols: secure backup drives, burner phones, encrypted emails, because Ella knew better than most that truth without proof was useless when facing a man so skilled at shaping lies into charm. What began as reaction quickly transformed into purpose. I was no longer a wife scorned. I was an architect, designing the blueprints of Daniel's downfall. And still, I said nothing. Each morning, I greeted him with a kiss and a cup of coffee, studying his face like a textbook written in deceit, memorizing the smug ease with which he slipped into domestic routine, utterly unaware that every gesture, every evasion, every late-night shower reeked of guilt. At night, once he'd drifted into the careless sleep of a man convinced of his own invincibility, I would lie beside him, eyes open, my thoughts churning with calculations, how to secure my future, how to protect Lucas, how to make Daniel's betrayal cost him everything he thought he could keep. I knew the law often favoured the one who struck first, so I struck, quietly, methodically, without ever lifting a finger in anger. I opened a private bank account in my name only and began siphoning small amounts from our joint savings, just enough to go unnoticed by a man who no longer looked at spreadsheets or grocery receipts. I paid down debts we shared, credit cards, car loans, even the mortgage on our house, ensuring that when the dust finally settled, I would not be tethered to him by any financial noose. I met with a lawyer in Charlotte, Annalise Harding, a steel-willed woman with a reputation for decimating men like Daniel in court. I told her everything, withholding nothing, and when I slid the first manila folder of evidence across her polished desk, I saw her eyes narrow with the focus of a predator. "This," she said, flipping through the contents, "is a divorce waiting to be weaponized." Her words didn't comfort me, but they did steel me further. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of vengeance. It was about reclaiming power, about ensuring that my son and I never again lived under the shadow of a man who believed we were disposable. As the weeks wore on, I adjusted every aspect of our lives to sever dependence. I updated my will, rewrote the beneficiaries on my life insurance, moved Lucas's pediatric care to a clinic closer to Ella's home, and made subtle inquiries into transferring his school enrollment. Daniel didn't notice. He was too absorbed in whatever fantasy life he was building with her, the unnamed woman whose perfume had begun to linger on his collars, whose laughter sometimes leaked through his speakerphone when he thought I wasn't listening. One afternoon I followed his car, just once. Ella had traced a pattern of Tuesday night disappearances, and I needed to see it with my own eyes. I stayed far behind, careful not to draw attention, as he drove into a quiet part of the city and pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel. I watched from across the street as he stepped out, straightened his collar and checked his reflection in the window like a teenage boy primping for prom. Minutes later she arrived, tall, calculated, with the air of someone who'd done this before. They kissed like strangers in a movie and disappeared inside without looking back. I didn't follow. I didn't cry. I just sat in my car, heart pounding, and added the final coordinates to my growing map of betrayal. It was no longer speculation. It was no longer theory. It was truth. And truth, when harnessed correctly, is more lethal than any outburst or accusation. Back home, I tucked Lucas in and read to him like I always did, his little hand curled around mine as he drifted to sleep without a care in the world. I watched his face in the dim light, wondering how much longer I could preserve this illusion of normalcy. He didn't know yet, couldn't possibly fathom the tectonic shift building beneath our home, but I knew that one day, when he was older, he'd ask how it all happened, how his father fell from grace and how his mother kept him safe through the storm. And when that day came, I wanted to be able to tell him I never lost control. So I waited. I gathered. I fortified. Daniel may have been writing the script for his own demise, but I was the one holding the pen. There's something uniquely haunting about realizing the person who betrayed you wasn't acting alone, not just in physicality but in intention. For weeks, I had been unraveling Daniel's lies, meticulously piecing together the timeline of his betrayal, believing it was driven by lust, ego, or the usual midlife cowardice that convinces a man he deserves more. But nothing could have prepared me for what I uncovered next, a twist so venomous it made the original affair feel almost tame by comparison. It started with a voice message buried in a deleted folder, one that Ella recovered while combing through Daniel's synced cloud backups. The message, left in a syrupy tone that made my skin crawl, was short but thick with implication. "We can't keep doing this forever, baby. If we want a real life, you have to stop pretending. She's holding you back. You know what needs to be done." That was the moment it shifted. from betrayal to conspiracy. Her name was Madeline Quinn. Blonde, polished, and surgically charming, she worked in marketing for a private real estate development firm in Savannah, though she clearly had no qualms about moonlighting as a homewrecker. I had suspected her of being nothing more than an opportunistic fling, but I was wrong. She wasn't just stealing moments, she was strategizing an extraction, one that involved dismantling my life piece by piece and installing herself in my place. Ella went deeper. She dug through public filings, social posts, even internal whistleblower complaints, and what she found left me breathless. Madeline had a pattern: 3 previous affairs with married executives, each one followed by sudden job changes and quiet severance packages that suggested settlements and scandal. But Daniel was different. He hadn't just fallen into her web, he'd become a willing architect of our collapse, lulled into believing that this siren with flawless veneers was offering him a life upgrade instead of a trap. What made it worse, what made it unforgivable, was reading the way they spoke about Lucas, my son, our son, as if he were a loose end to be dealt with. One message in particular remains etched into my memory like acid on glass. He'll adapt. Kids are resilient. If she really loved him, she'd let go. Don't let her manipulate you with the kid card. In that moment, any trace of hesitation I might have harbored turned to ash. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a calculated assault on my family, on the innocence of a child who had done nothing but love his father unconditionally. I could almost stomach Daniel betraying me, but jeopardizing Lucas's emotional safety, inviting a stranger to influence his future, was the line he had no right to cross. It became clear that Madeline didn't just want Daniel's affection. She wanted my life, stripped from me, handed over like a luxury handbag she believed she could wear better. She wanted the house, the family image, the stability I had bled for, repackaged under her name while I was expected to fade quietly into the background. But I don't fade. Instead, I intensified. I asked Ella to start tracking every intersection between Madeline and Daniel's finances. Any transfer, receipt, or calendar invite that might prove premeditation, collusion, or concealment. We found evidence of a joint investment account he had opened under a shell LLC, one that had started receiving deposits just weeks after the affair began. I followed that trail until it led to a lakeside property under contract, one I hadn't approved, hadn't heard of, but that listed Daniel's email as the point of contact. I began compiling everything: emails, text exchanges, reservation receipts, signed documents, even witness statements from a hotel clerk who confirmed seeing them check in multiple times under false names. Every piece was sorted and sealed into the legal dossier like surgical instruments, each one precise, irrefutable, and sharp. But my favourite piece of evidence was also the most poetic: a grainy security cam still of the 2 of them at a bar in Atlanta, smiling smugly at one another while Lucas and I sat at home watching reruns and pretending everything was fine. That photo, their laughter, their oblivion, became the symbol of their downfall in my mind. Because while they clinked their glasses and toasted their deceit, I was building the case that would ensure they paid for it in ways they hadn't yet imagined. Still, I never said a word. To Daniel, I remained the dutiful wife, attentive and tender, quietly shouldering the weight of his absence and disinterest. I even arranged a weekend camping trip for Lucas and me, just the 2 of us, while Daniel was working late. And while he coiled himself deeper into Madeline's arms, I was planting the final seeds of our separation. There was a time, not long ago, when I would have begged him to stay, when I would have bent myself in half to patch what he had torn. But now I saw him for what he truly was. Not a mistake, but a warning. And Madeline, she was a symptom, not a source. A woman so hollow that she needed to devour someone else's life in order to feel full. They thought I didn't know. They thought I was blind, fragile, too maternal to fight back. They were wrong. By the time I fully understood the scope of Daniel's betrayal, not just the affair, but the deliberate effort to erase me from the life I had built, it no longer felt like heartbreak. It felt like war. And if he had chosen to wage it in shadows, whispering lies behind closed doors and slipping away under false names, then I would rise from the silence and meet him with precision and purpose, striking where it would cut deepest. Everything I had gathered over the past 2 months, the receipts, the call logs, the bank transfers, the private hotel bookings, even the shared rental property under the shell company, was now organized with meticulous care, preserved in both physical and digital form, each piece a stepping stone toward a singular outcome: total legal and financial detonation. It was Ella who introduced me to Ava Renner, a divorce attorney from Charlotte known for her unshakable resolve and surgical strategy. Her office didn't feel like a place of sympathy. It felt like a war room. Dark wood, sharp corners, and books stacked like weapons. I sat across from her, fingers steady despite the storm still humming in my chest, and laid out the entire dossier with a calmness I barely recognized as mine. She didn't blink. Instead, she flipped through the photos and transcripts with a quiet intensity, pausing only to make notations or shake her head at the audacity of what she was reading. "This isn't just adultery," she said after a long silence. "This is premeditated fraud, marital misconduct, and parental negligence, all wrapped in a bow of arrogance." We began drawing the battle lines. Ava explained that North Carolina was an at-fault divorce state, which meant we could pursue a judgment based on Daniel's infidelity, especially if it could be shown to have impacted the marital estate and Lucas's well-being. I gave her everything, every damning detail, every cruel word exchanged between Daniel and Madeline that we had recovered from cloud backups and hidden folders, every late-night transfer of money from our joint accounts into the private LLC, and I wasn't done. Under Ava's guidance, I began severing every remaining connection that could give Daniel leverage. The utilities were transferred to my name. Lucas's school records were updated with my contact information as sole guardian. The title on our home was redrafted through a quitclaim filing that Ava engineered, making use of a clause buried in our prenup that Daniel likely forgot existed. Each step was executed with quiet authority, every form signed without ceremony, every signature another link broken in the chain he once used to keep me tethered. But my preparations didn't stop with the courtroom. With Ella's help, I traced Daniel's misconduct beyond the marriage, into his professional life. She found emails, LinkedIn connections, and internal company chatter that hinted at Madeline's history of seducing married executives at Concordant Developments, the company where Daniel served as a senior acquisitions manager. Ella, with her background in corporate investigations, sent a carefully crafted anonymous package to Concordant's Human Resources Department. The dossier included not only evidence of the affair, but also evidence suggesting that Madeline had manipulated Daniel into redirecting company opportunities for her personal gain. It didn't take long before the ripple turned into a wave. Daniel, oblivious to the noose tightening around him, began coming home later, reeking of cologne that wasn't mine and offering excuses that wouldn't pass muster in a high school drama club. He was sloppy now, too confident, too convinced of his invulnerability. I played my role with Oscar-worthy grace, warm when needed, aloof when convenient, always careful never to raise suspicion. What he didn't realize was that every lie he told, every whisper he muttered into his phone when he thought I wasn't listening, every moment he disappeared behind a locked office door, was adding to the weight of the wrecking ball I was quietly building. And when it dropped, I wanted him to hear it coming only a second before impact. Lucas remained my anchor. I poured everything I had into keeping his world bright and whole. We went on weekend adventures, trips to the nature preserve, homemade pizza nights, and bedtime stories that turned into whispered conversations about hopes and dreams. He knew something had shifted, though I kept the darkness far from his eyes. He deserved light, and I would protect it with everything I had left. Ava prepared the legal motion for divorce, citing adultery and marital waste. The filing was timed perfectly, just after Concordon initiated their internal ethics review, which, from what Ella overheard through her connections, was already shaking Daniel's position. I asked Ava to include a request for full physical custody of Lucas, supported by documentation of Daniel's recent absences, erratic behaviour, and financial instability. We weren't just ending a marriage, we were rewriting the narrative of who got to keep the future. Everything, every lie, every cruel joke, every secret rendezvous had become evidence. And as I printed the last stack of screenshots and slid them into a labelled envelope, I felt a stillness come over me. Not the kind of quiet born of fear or numbness, but the calm that settles over someone who knows without doubt that they are ready. Ready to strike, ready to reclaim what was stolen, ready to end this on my terms. Because Daniel thought he'd be the one to walk away clean, while I clung to fragments and regrets. He had no idea I was the one setting the stage for his downfall. There's a peculiar stillness that settles in the air just before the storm breaks, not the chaos of wind and rain, but the suspended breath of nature waiting for impact. That's exactly what it felt like the night I summoned Daniel home under the pretense of a conversation. He thought it would be another mild marital mediation, maybe a plea for clarity or forgiveness, or worse, a desperate attempt at reconciliation. But this time, I wasn't the woman who begged or waited. I was the storm. Lucas was safely with Ella for the night, unaware of the eruption I was about to unleash, and for that, I was deeply grateful. There were truths in this confrontation that no child should ever witness. Truths heavy with betrayal, layered with disgrace, and saturated in the consequences Daniel had been blissfully blind to for far too long. When he walked through the front door, I was already seated in the living room, the light low and steady, the manila folder of evidence lying neatly on the coffee table, like an offering, or a verdict. He approached casually, loosening his tie, smiling as if this were just another night at home, and I almost pitied his ignorance. Almost. "You wanted to talk?" he asked, voice light, a little too rehearsed. I didn't answer with words. I simply gestured toward the folder. At first, he didn't understand. I watched his brows knit together as he flipped the cover open, the confusion gradually giving way to recognition, and then to a blooming dread that drained the colour from his face. Page after page of printed emails, screenshots of messages, financial records, surveillance stills, hotel invoices, all curated and collated with a precision that left no room for denial. "Claire," he murmured, eyes wide with disbelief as his fingers trembled against the paper. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," I replied, my voice calm, almost detached, like a judge delivering sentence rather than a wife confronting devastation. "You've already said enough. To her, to your colleagues, to your accountant, to yourself. I'm just here to finish listening." He stumbled through half-hearted denials, pathetic attempts to reframe the narrative, to cast the affair as a mistake, a lapse in judgment, a moment of weakness. But I wasn't there to pass excuses. I had spent too many nights cataloguing his betrayals to allow him the dignity of distortion. "I know everything, Daniel," I said quietly, but with steel beneath the words. "From the money you funneled into that joint investment account, to the apartment in Lake Grover, to the plans to move forward with your new life, before even asking for a divorce, I know she wanted you to do the right thing. I just don't think she expected I'd do it first." His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and just as his hands moved to reach for mine, to beg, to plead, I heard the door click open behind him. Ava stepped in, dressed in muted navy, her heels silent against the hardwood, a stack of legal papers in her hand. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. "Mr. Whitmore," she said coolly, laying the papers on top of the folder he had yet to close. "These are the divorce documents. I suggest you read carefully before signing. You'll find the terms comprehensive." He looked between us, stunned, his voice catching as he asked, "You already filed?" "I filed the moment you kissed her in Atlanta. That photo alone would grant me custody in 3 states," I said, allowing myself the faintest smile, one born not of cruelty, but of clarity. It was in that moment, when he realized just how completely the floor had dropped out from under him, that the facade cracked. The arrogance melted away, replaced by something raw and primitive: fear. And as much as I once loved the man before me, I found no sorrow in watching that fear take hold, because he had earned every ripple of it through choices made in secret, through lies told with a steady gaze, through the deliberate unraveling of the life we had built. Over the following days, the consequences came like waves. Daniel was suspended from Concordon as the internal investigation expanded, the ethics board now armed with the same evidence I had provided Ava. Madeline disappeared from the company directory shortly after. Word spread, not from me, but from whispers in the halls he used to walk with pride. And just like that, the empire of deceit he'd so carefully constructed began to rot from within. He tried reaching out, of course, first with tearful voicemails and desperate emails, then with angry threats masked as negotiations. But each message was dutifully forwarded to Ava and filed accordingly. I didn't answer, not once, because when a man chooses to burn a bridge, he forfeits the right to ask you how to rebuild it. Lucas, sensing the absence but not yet the pain, asked only gentle questions at first. "Is Dad okay?" he said one evening while eating pasta, twirling noodles with the kind of innocent focus only children can still possess. I smiled softly and said, "Daddy's going through some grown-up consequences, sweetheart. But you and we're just fine." And we were. Because for the first time in years, I could breathe without scanning for secrets. I could sleep without wondering whose perfume lingered on his collar. I could walk into my own home and feel safe, not because he was there, but because he wasn't. The reckoning wasn't a scream or a slap or a storm of broken dishes. It was deliberate, surgical, composed. And that, I realized, was what made it unforgettable. Daniel had expected chaos. What he received was consequence. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. In the weeks that followed the final confrontation, a strange kind of silence settled over my world. Not empty, not hollow, but peaceful, like the hush that comes after a long and brutal storm has passed. There were no more slammed doors, no late-night phone calls whispered from behind locked doors, no constant weight in my chest from wondering what new lie I would have to swallow tomorrow. Instead, there was stillness. And in that stillness, I found something I hadn't felt in years: space to breathe. Daniel was gone, not just from the house, but from the center of my life, from the emotional and mental real estate he had occupied for far too long. He moved out shortly after the papers were filed, dragging behind him the wreckage of his choices like a man waking from a dream to find himself homeless in his own story. His emails turned from angry to pleading, his texts from bitter to pathetic, but I read none of them. Ava handled everything. My attention was no longer his to demand. What surprised me most wasn't the relief. It was how quickly life began to bloom again in his absence. Without his chaos, the house seemed brighter, the air somehow lighter, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Lucas noticed it too. He smiled more. He slept more soundly. His questions about his father became less frequent, and when they did come, they were laced with curiosity rather than worry. I chose honesty with him, age-appropriate but sincere. "Your dad made some choices that hurt our family," I told him one afternoon as we folded laundry together. "But you are safe, you are loved, and none of this was ever your fault." He nodded, and in that quiet gesture I saw strength, the same kind of quiet resilience I had fought to reclaim in myself. Little by little, I rebuilt the pieces of a life that felt entirely mine for the first time in over a decade. I transformed my graphic design skills, something I had nearly abandoned, into a full-time freelance business, pouring my energy into branding work for small businesses across the Southeast. It wasn't just income, it was identity. With each project completed, each invoice paid, I felt more grounded in the person I had once been, before I shrank to fit inside someone else's world. Ella remained my rock, steadfast, sharp, unflinchingly loyal. Together we founded a small support circle for women navigating betrayal and divorce. What began as coffee and conversation in my living room grew into a quiet force of healing. We shared stories, swapped legal tips, mourned losses and celebrated victories, both large and small. For many of us, it wasn't just about divorce, it was about rediscovery, about reclaiming space, voice and worth. And there were days, of course, when the memories clawed back in. I'd pass the restaurant where he once met her, or stumble across an old voicemail buried in a backup folder. And in those moments, I'd feel that familiar sting, like a bruise I thought had faded pressing back against my skin. But pain, I've learned, isn't always a wound. It's sometimes just a scar reminding you how far you've come. Daniel's life, from what little I allowed myself to hear, unraveled further. Concordant terminated his contract after the internal investigation confirmed his misconduct. Madeline left town shortly after, her reputation in shambles. Whether they stayed together, I never bothered to find out. What mattered was that they no longer had a place in the future I was building. Lucas and I travelled that summer, just the two of us. We hiked in the Blue Ridge, explored Savannah's moss-draped squares, and spent lazy evenings reading books by firelight in a rented cabin tucked away in the mountains. He laughed with abandon, asked questions about the stars, and told me one night as we watched the fireflies rise from the grass, "Mom, I like it when it's just us." I squeezed his hand and smiled. "So do I, sweetheart. So do I." If there's one thing I've come to believe with unwavering certainty, it's this. We are not defined by what breaks us, but by how we choose to rebuild. Daniel thought he was writing my ending, that I would crumple under the weight of his betrayal and disappear. Instead, I became something far stronger than I ever imagined. Because strength, I've learned, isn't loud or brash. Sometimes it's just quiet endurance, stitched together by patience and fire. So to anyone listening, whether you've been betrayed, abandoned, silenced, or made to feel invisible, hear me now. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not foolish for having loved, and you are never too far gone to begin again. You may have been hurt in the dark, but your healing belongs in the light. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your story isn't over. Sometimes it's just waiting to begin.